I still remember the exact moment my life turned upside down. I was standing at my kitchen sink washing the dinner plates from Sunday supper when I heard the knock at the door. It was that firm, authoritative knock that makes your stomach drop even before you know why. I dried my hands on the dish towel, the one with sunflowers, that my late husband Gerald had bought me at a craft fair in 1997, and opened the door to find two police officers on my front porch. "Mrs. Heather Patterson," the taller one asked. "Yes, that's me." My voice came out smaller than I intended. "Ma'am, we need you to come with us. There's been a report of theft and we need to ask you some questions." I actually laughed. Not a real laugh, but that nervous sound you make when something is so absurd your brain can't process it. "Theft? There must be some mistake. I haven't. Ma'am, please come with us." They didn't handcuff me right away. That came later at the station after Brittany had finished her performance. My daughter-in-law sat in a separate room, and through the window I could see her dabbing at her eyes with a tissue. She was 28, blonde, pretty in that careful way some young women are, with her highlighted hair always perfectly styled and her nails always done. She'd married my son Derek 4 years after they met at a bar in Des Moines, and I'd welcomed her with open arms because that's what you do. You welcome your children's choices and you love them because your children love them. The detective, a heavy-set man with kind eyes named Brandon, sat across from me in that terrible fluorescent-lit room. "Mrs. Patterson, your daughter-in-law Brittany claims that $2,000 in cash is missing from her purse. She says you were the only other person in her home this afternoon while she was upstairs putting the baby down for a nap." "That's not possible," I said, and my hands were shaking so badly I had to clasp them together. "I would never. Brandon, I've never stolen anything in my life. I was there watching Kaylee and Emma. Brittany asked me to come over because she had a doctor's appointment and needed help with the girls. She says she had the money in an envelope in her purse, $2,000. She says when she came back downstairs, she checked and it was gone. I felt something crack inside my chest. Why would I take money from my own son's wife, from my granddaughter's mother? I don't need money. Gerald's pension and my social security are enough. I live simply. This doesn't make any sense." But it didn't matter what made sense. They arrested me. They actually arrested me, read me my rights like I'd seen on television shows, and took my fingerprints. The ink stained my fingers black, and I kept thinking about how I'd need to scrub them before church on Sunday. Then I realised I might not be at church on Sunday, and that's when I started to cry. Not loud, just silent tears running down my face while a female officer logged my personal belongings into a plastic bag. They let me make a phone call. I didn't call my sons. Timothy was in Arizona with his family, and Joseph had enough stress with his job in Chicago. Derek was somewhere in Germany on a training exercise, unreachable. So I called my neighbour Linda, who I'd known for 33 years, and asked her to water my tomato plants. I don't know why that mattered right then, but it did. Those tomato plants were from seeds Gerald had saved the summer before he died, and I couldn't let them die too. The court-appointed attorney they gave me was named Kyle Brennan. He was maybe 45, with tired eyes and a coffee stain on his tie, and when he sat down across from me in the holding cell, I expected him to tell me to plead guilty to something I didn't do, just to make it all go away faster. Instead, he said, "Mrs. Patterson, I need you to tell me everything about today. Every single detail, no matter how small." So I did. I told him how Brittany had called me that morning, her voice sweet as pie, asking if I could come watch the girls because she had a gynecologist appointment at 2 o'clock. I told him I'd arrived at noon like she'd asked, and that I'd brought homemade chocolate chip cookies because Emma had mentioned she loved them. I described how we'd coloured pictures at the kitchen table, how I'd made them grilled cheese sandwiches for lunch, how we'd watched 2 episodes of that cartoon with the talking dogs. "Did you go anywhere else in the house?" Kyle asked. "Just the living room and the kitchen and the bathroom once. Brittany was upstairs with the baby Madison. She's only 6 months old. She's been colicky, poor thing. Did you touch Brittany's purse? No, I wouldn't. It was sitting on the counter in the kitchen, but I didn't touch it. Kyle wrote something down and I noticed his wedding ring was worn thin, like he'd been married a long time. Mrs. Patterson, do you have security cameras at your house? The question seemed to come out of nowhere. Yes, actually, Derek installed them for me 2 years ago after there were some break-ins in the neighbourhood. One faces the front door, one faces the back. They record to some cloud thing. I don't really understand the technology, but Derek set it all up. Something shifted in Kyle's expression. Do you know if Brittany and Derek have cameras at their house? I think so. Derek's very careful about security. It's the military training, you know. Kyle leaned forward. Mrs. Patterson, I need you to do exactly as I say. This is very important. Don't talk to Brittany. Don't talk to anyone about this case. Not your neighbours, not your friends, not even your other sons. If Brittany calls you, don't answer. If she tries to visit, don't let her in. Can you do that? I don't understand. Shouldn't I try to talk to her, explain that I didn't? No. His voice was firm. Trust me on this. Just stay quiet and let me handle it. I wanted to argue, but something in his certainty made me nod. All right. They released me on my own recognizance that evening. I drove home in my 2003 Honda Civic, the one Gerald had bought used because we'd never believed in wasteful spending, and I sat in my driveway for 20 minutes before I could make myself go inside. My house felt different, violated somehow, even though nothing had changed. The same floral wallpaper Gerald and I had hung in 1985. The same photographs of my boys at various ages lining the hallway, the same cross-stitch sampler I'd made that read "Bless this home" hanging above the sofa. But I felt different, like something had been stolen from me that I couldn't name. The next morning, Brittany called. I stared at her name on my phone screen. I'd finally learnt to use the caller ID and remembered Kyle's instructions. I didn't answer. She called 3 more times that day. Then she started texting, "Mum Heather, please talk to me. I don't understand why you won't answer. The girls miss you." That last one almost broke me. I missed Kaylee and Emma desperately. Kaylee was 5 with Derek's dark hair and serious brown eyes. Emma was 3, all giggles and energy. I'd been watching them every Tuesday and Thursday for the past 2 years while Brittany worked her part-time job at the dental office. I'd taught Kaylee to count to 100 and helped her learn her ABCs. I'd rocked Emma through her terrible 2s, and now I couldn't see them because their mother had accused me of being a thief. On Wednesday, Linda came over with a casserole. She set it on my kitchen counter and looked at me with those searching eyes that meant she knew something was wrong. "Heather, are you all right? You look like you haven't slept." "I'm fine," I lied. "You're not fine. What's going on?" I almost told her. The words were right there, climbing up my throat, desperate to get out. But Kyle's voice echoed in my head. "Don't talk to anyone." So I just smiled and said I had a stomach bug. And Linda left looking worried but respectful of my privacy. The hearing was set for the following Monday. I had 5 days to live in this strange limbo where I was a criminal but also innocent, where my daughter-in-law was both my accuser and someone I'd loved like my own daughter. I kept going over it in my mind. Had I done something to offend Brittany? Had I overstepped somehow? I'd always been careful not to interfere, not to give unsolicited advice, not to be the kind of mother-in-law you complain about to your friends. Sure, I'd noticed things, the way Brittany sometimes spoke sharply to the girls when she was tired, how she'd roll her eyes when Derek called from overseas, like his service was an inconvenience rather than a sacrifice. The expensive purses and shoes that appeared regularly even though they were supposedly struggling financially. But I'd never said anything. I'd bitten my tongue and reminded myself that every marriage has its own rhythm, its own balance. On Sunday I went to church alone. I sat in my usual pew, 4th row from the front on the right side, and I listened to Pastor Jonathan preach about forgiveness. The irony wasn't lost on me. I kept thinking, how do you forgive someone who's trying to destroy you? But then I'd remember all the teachings I'd grown up with, all the Sunday school lessons I taught when my boys were young. Forgiveness isn't about the other person deserving it. It's about not letting bitterness eat you alive from the inside. Still sitting there in that church where I'd been married, where I'd baptised my sons, where I'd held Gerald's funeral service 3 years ago, I felt so alone. Monday morning arrived like an executioner. I put on my navy blue dress, the one I wore to funerals and important occasions. I fastened my mother's pearl earrings with trembling fingers. I looked at myself in the mirror and barely recognised the woman staring back, 79 years old, grey-haired with fear etched into every line on her face. Kyle met me at the courthouse. It was a modern building, all glass and steel, so different from the old courthouse downtown where Gerald had served on a jury once. Inside, everything was fluorescent lights and polished floors that squeaked under my sensible shoes. And there was Brittany. She sat on a bench outside the courtroom with her lawyer, a sharp-looking woman in a burgundy suit. Brittany wore black pants and a cream blouse, and her makeup was perfect except for the mascara that had run just slightly, just enough to suggest she'd been crying. When she saw me, our eyes met for just a second, and I swear I saw something flicker across her face. Not guilt, not exactly, something harder, something that made my blood run cold. Then she looked away and whispered something to her lawyer, and I saw it. The smallest smile, just the corner of her mouth lifting like she'd already won. Kyle touched my elbow gently. "Remember," he said quietly, "don't say anything, just trust me." We entered the courtroom, and I'd never felt more afraid in my entire life. The courtroom was smaller than I'd expected, more like a large office than the grand chambers you see on television. Judge Patricia Morrison sat behind the bench, a black woman in her 50s with reading glasses perched on her nose and an expression that suggested she'd seen every kind of human behaviour imaginable and wasn't impressed by any of it. Brittany's lawyer stood first. Her name was Christine Valdez, and she spoke with the kind of polished confidence that comes from expensive law school and years of winning. "Your Honour, this is a straightforward case of theft. Mrs. Patterson was entrusted with the care of her granddaughters and used that trust to steal $2,000 in cash from my client's home. My client has a statement, physical evidence of the missing money, and Your Honour," Kyle interrupted, and his voice was so calm it was almost boring, "if I may." Judge Morrison looked at him over her glasses. "Mr. Brennan, let her finish. Of course, my apologies." Christine continued, laying out her case like she was arranging flowers, everything placed just so, designed to look beautiful and convincing. She described how Brittany had withdrawn the $2,000 from the bank that morning to pay a contractor who was going to renovate their bathroom, how she'd placed it in an envelope in her purse, how she'd asked me to watch the children while she went to a doctor's appointment, how she'd returned home to find the money gone, and only I had been there. "Mrs. Patterson has motive," Christine said, and I felt my stomach twist. "She's living on a fixed income, her late husband's pension and social security. She drives a 20-year-old car. She lives alone in a house that needs repairs. $2,000 would mean a great deal to her." I wanted to scream. I wanted to stand up and tell that judge that Gerald and I had never needed much, that we'd raised 3 boys on less, that I'd never once envied anyone their money or their things. But Kyle had told me to stay quiet, so I sat there with my hands folded in my lap, feeling my mother's pearls press against my earlobes. Then Kyle stood up. He didn't rush. He gathered his papers slowly, deliberately, like a man who had all the time in the world. "Your Honour," he said, "we have no concerns about these charges whatsoever." I felt my heart skip. What did that mean? Was he giving up? Was he saying I was guilty? "In fact," Kyle continued, and now I heard something new in his voice, something sharp beneath the calm, "we welcome the opportunity to present evidence that will completely exonerate Mrs. Patterson and reveal the truth of what happened that afternoon." Brittany shifted in her seat. I couldn't see her face, but I saw her shoulders stiffen. Your Honour, Mrs. Patterson's son, Miss Brittany Patterson's husband, installed a comprehensive security camera system in their home approximately 18 months ago. These cameras cover the front entrance, the back entrance, the living room and the kitchen. They record continuously to a cloud-based storage system. I watched Christine lean over and whisper something urgently to Brittany. Brittany whispered back, and even from where I sat I could see her face starting to change colour. Kyle pulled out a tablet. With the court's permission, I'd like to present footage from the afternoon in question. Judge Morrison nodded. Proceed. What happened next felt like watching my own life on television. The footage showed me arriving at Brittany's house at 11:58 a.m, carrying my purse and a plastic container of cookies. It showed me sitting at the kitchen table with Kaylee and Emma, colouring. It showed me making grilled cheese sandwiches, cutting them into triangles the way Emma liked. It showed me wiping Emma's face with a napkin, reading them a story, setting up the cartoon on the television. And it showed Brittany's purse sitting on the kitchen counter, untouched. The timestamp ran continuously in the corner. 12:15 p.m, 12:47 p.m, 1:23 p.m. I never went near that purse, not once. But then Kyle fast forward to 2:18 p.m, about 15 minutes after Brittany said she'd left for her appointment. The footage showed Brittany coming back downstairs. She'd never left the house at all. She walked into the kitchen, looked around to make sure the girls were occupied in the living room, and then she opened her own purse. She took out an envelope, she looked at it, and then she put it in a drawer beneath the microwave. The courtroom was absolutely silent. Kyle let the footage play for another 30 seconds, showing Brittany checking her phone, smoothing her hair, and then walking back upstairs. Then he paused it. Your Honour, this footage shows clearly that Mrs. Patterson never touched the purse in question. It also shows that Miss Brittany Patterson removed the envelope containing the money herself and concealed it in her own kitchen. I turned to look at Brittany. All the colour had drained from her face. She looked like a ghost, pale and translucent, and her carefully applied makeup suddenly seemed garish against her white skin. Her lawyer was frantically whispering to her, but Brittany just sat there frozen. Judge Morrison removed her glasses slowly. Miss Valdez, does your client wish to respond to this evidence? Christine stood up, but her polish was gone. She looked like someone had pulled the rug out from under her. Your Honour, my client was not aware of the existence of these recordings. She's not aware. Kyle's voice cut through like a knife, and for the first time I heard anger in it. Your Honour, Miss Brittany Patterson's own husband installed these cameras. She lives in that house. She knows they're there. She filed a false police report against a 79-year-old woman who has no criminal record, who served her community as a school secretary for 30 years, who was doing nothing more than caring for her beloved granddaughters. She allowed Mrs. Patterson to be arrested, fingerprinted and charged with a crime she didn't commit. This wasn't a mistake, this was calculated. Judge Morrison's expression had gone from patient to cold. She looked at Brittany the way you'd look at something unpleasant you'd found on the bottom of your shoe. Miss Patterson, Brittany Patterson, stand up. Brittany stood, and I could see her legs shaking. Did you file a false police report? Brittany's mouth opened and closed. No sound came out. Answer the question. Brittany's voice came out as a whisper. I made a mistake. You thought what, that cameras installed in your own home wouldn't record you? Or you thought that this court wouldn't bother to check? Judge Morrison's voice was ice. Filing a false police report is a serious crime, Miss Patterson. It wastes law enforcement resources, it clogs up our court system, and in this case it caused immeasurable harm to an innocent woman. Brittany started crying, then real tears this time, not the fake ones she'd performed for the police. I'm sorry, she sobbed. I'm so sorry. I didn't think, You just what? Judge Morrison demanded. You just thought you'd frame your husband's mother for theft. Help me understand your thinking here. But Brittany couldn't answer. She just stood there crying, and I felt something strange wash over me. Not satisfaction, not vindication, just a deep aching sadness for how broken everything had become. Judge Morrison turned to me. Mrs. Patterson, all charges against you are dismissed immediately. On behalf of this court, I apologise for what you've been put through. Then she turned back to Brittany. Miss Patterson, I'm holding you in contempt of court. Bailiff, take her into custody. Everything happened very fast after that. A bailiff walked over to Brittany, who looked like she might faint. Christine was talking rapidly, something about her client's mental state, about postpartum issues, about stress. Judge Morrison listened, and I saw her expression soften just slightly. Miss Patterson will serve 5 days in county jail, the judge said. After that, she'll be on probation for 1 year and will be required to complete community service and counselling. And Miss Patterson, she waited until Brittany looked up at her. If you ever waste this court's time again, the consequences will be far more severe. They led Brittany away. She looked back at me once, her face streaked with mascara, her eyes pleading for something I couldn't name. I just sat there watching my daughter-in-law being taken to jail, and all I could think was why. Kyle drove me home. We didn't talk much. When he pulled into my driveway, he turned to me and said, Mrs. Patterson, I need you to understand something. I've been doing this job for 19 years. I've seen people lie for money, for revenge, for drugs, for custody of their kids. But I've never seen someone lie about something like this without a reason that makes sense to them, even if it doesn't make sense to us. What are you saying? I'm saying that something's going on with Brittany. I don't know what, but people don't usually do things like this out of nowhere. I thought about that a lot over the next few days. I thought about it while I watered Gerald's tomato plants, which had somehow survived without me. I thought about it while I made myself dinner, just scrambled eggs. I wasn't very hungry. I thought about it when Derek finally called from Germany, his voice breaking as he apologised over and over for what his wife had done. Mum, I don't understand, he kept saying. I just don't understand. I know, sweetheart, I don't either. The hardest part was knowing that my granddaughters were without their mother for 5 days. Derek's sister-in-law, Michelle, was watching them, and she sent me pictures. Kaylee looking confused, Emma asking where Mummy went. My heart broke for them. None of this was their fault. 5 days later, when Brittany was released, Derek called to ask if I'd be willing to meet with them. Just him and Brittany, no lawyers, no courtrooms, just family. I almost said no. I'd been sleeping better. The knot in my stomach had started to loosen. I'd even gone back to my Tuesday morning Bible study group, though I hadn't told them what had happened. Part of me wanted to just close this chapter and move on, but then I thought about Gerald, about how he'd always said that family is worth fighting for, especially when it's hard, about how forgiveness isn't something you give because it's been earned, but because holding on to anger is like drinking poison and expecting the other person to die. So I said yes. They came to my house on a Thursday evening. Derek looked like he'd aged 10 years in 2 weeks. Brittany looked small and broken, her hair pulled back in a ponytail, no makeup, wearing jeans and a plain t-shirt. She couldn't meet my eyes. We sat in my living room, the same room where I'd hosted their wedding shower 6 years ago, the same room where we'd celebrated Christmases and birthdays. Derek sat next to Brittany on the couch, and I sat in Gerald's old armchair across from them. For a long moment, nobody spoke. Then Brittany said, her voice barely above a whisper, I don't know how to explain what I did. Try, I said. Not unkindly, but firmly. She looked up at me, and her eyes were red and swollen. I've been struggling for months, maybe longer, after Madison was born. Everything just got so hard. Derek was gone, so much. The girls needed so much. The bills kept piling up. And I felt like I was drowning, but everyone expected me to just handle it, you know. To be fine. I listened, I didn't interrupt, and her voice broke. You were always so perfect, always patient with the girls, always had cookies baked, always had your house clean, always knew the right thing to say. And I felt like such a failure next to you. Like Derek must wish he'd married someone more like his mother. Brittany. I know, she said quickly. I know that's crazy. I know none of this is your fault. But I was so angry all the time and I didn't even know why. And then one day I just thought if she wasn't around, maybe I'd feel better. Maybe Derek would see that I was trying. Maybe I wouldn't feel so inadequate all the time. Derek had his head in his hands. I could see his shoulders shaking. So you decided to frame me for theft, I said slowly. I know how it sounds. I know it was insane. I withdrew that money and I was going to pay the contractor. And then I had this thought. And instead of letting it go, I acted on it. And then once I started, I couldn't stop. I told the police. I made the report. And I thought maybe they'd just warn you or something, not arrest you. You didn't think at all, Derek said, his voice muffled. Jesus, Brittany, my mother. We sat there in that terrible silence and I felt the weight of everything that had been broken. Trust, family, love, all of it shattered because someone was hurting and didn't know how to ask for help. Finally, I said, you need to see someone, a counsellor, a therapist, someone who can help you work through whatever's happening in your head. I am, Brittany said quickly. It's part of my probation, but I started even before that. After the first session, I'm going twice a week. Good, Mrs. Patterson, Mum Heather, I know I don't deserve your forgiveness. I know I probably never will, but I need you to know that I am so sorry for everything. I looked at this young woman who'd accused me of theft, who'd had me arrested, who'd put me through the worst week of my life. And I thought about all those Sunday school lessons, all those sermons, all those prayers. What would Jesus do? It's a cliche, but sitting there in that moment, it was the only question that mattered. I forgive you, I said. Brittany started crying, Derek started crying, and I realised my own cheeks were wet. But I continued, and my voice was stronger now. Forgiveness doesn't mean everything goes back to normal. You broke something, Brittany. It's going to take time to rebuild, maybe a long time, and you're going to have to prove, not with words, but with actions, that you're getting better. I will, she said. I promise I will. That was 4 months ago. Brittany finished her jail sentence. It was only 5 days, but Derek told me later it was the worst 5 days of her life. She goes to therapy twice a week. She's on medication for postpartum depression and anxiety, conditions she'd been ignoring for almost a year. She's in a support group for mothers struggling with mental health. And slowly, very slowly, we're rebuilding. I see Kaylee and Emma every week now, though. At first it was just supervised visits with Derek present. The girls don't know what happened, just that Mummy was sick for a while, but she's getting better. Kaylee asked me once why I hadn't come to see them, and I told her that sometimes grown-ups have problems they need to fix, and it takes time. She seemed to accept that. Last Tuesday, Brittany asked if I wanted to stay for dinner after watching the girls. It was the first time she'd really initiated anything. We made spaghetti together in her kitchen, the same kitchen where the cameras had recorded everything, and we talked about ordinary things. The girls' upcoming school year, a recipe for pot roast, the weather. It wasn't comfortable, not yet, maybe it never will be completely, but it was a start. I've learnt something through all of this. Forgiveness isn't a feeling, it's a choice you make over and over again. Some days it's easy, some days I wake up angry all over again, remembering how it felt to be handcuffed, to be accused, to sit in that courtroom, convinced my whole world was ending. But then I remember Brittany's face when she said she felt like she was drowning. And I remember that hurt people, and that grace is something we all need, especially when we don't deserve it. Last Sunday after church, I stopped by the cemetery where Gerald is buried. I do that sometimes just to talk to him, even though I know he can't hear me. Or maybe he can, I don't know. You were right, I told his headstone. Family is worth fighting for, even when it's the hardest thing in the world. The wind rustled through the oak trees overhead, and I could almost hear his voice. Of course I was right. When was I ever wrong? That made me smile. I drove home and there was a text message on my phone from Brittany. Just a picture of Emma holding up a drawing she'd made, a stick figure with grey hair and pearl earrings, surrounded by hearts. The caption read, "Emma wanted to draw Grandma Heather. She misses you." I texted back, "I miss her too. See you Tuesday." It wasn't everything. It wasn't perfect, but it was forgiveness in motion, and sometimes that's all you can ask for. I'm 79 years old. I've lived through the death of the love of my life, raised 3 sons, survived an accusation that nearly destroyed me, and I've learnt that the hardest commandment, love your enemies, forgive those who hurt you, is also the most important one. Not because it's easy, but because it's the only thing that breaks the cycle of pain. Brittany isn't my enemy. She's a broken young woman who made a terrible choice and is trying to do better. She's my son's wife and my granddaughter's mother. She's family, and family, even when it's messy, even when it's painful, even when it requires more grace than you think you have to give, is always worth it.